I showed up to my son's wedding as a proud single father, only to find my nameplate labeled uneducated pretend dad. But within 24 hours, the people who mocked me faced a downfall they never imagined. I showed up to my son's wedding as a devoted single father, only to discover my nameplate had been altered to read, uneducated pretend dad. The bride's relatives snickered until my son declared, "Dad, we're leaving." 24 hours later, their business received devastating news they never anticipated. There I was, positioned at the rear of that marble reception hall in downtown Chicago, adjusting my discount store suit that always felt too tight. 22 years had passed since Sarah departed, abandoning me with a sobbing toddler and overwhelming debt. 2 decades of construction work by day and shelf stocking at Home Depot after dark. 22 years of boxed dinners and thrift store clothing. Yet Trevor and I managed to survive together. Now we found ourselves surrounded by crystal light fixtures illuminating tables worth more than my rent payment. Attendees wore haute couture while sipping expensive champagne with names I couldn't attempt to say. This was Trevor's big day. Pride filled my heart watching my boy, striking in his tailored tuxedo, chatting with his bride's relatives near the musical ensemble. I approached the family seating area, looking for my assigned place. The bride's clan, the Hawthorns, had invested heavily in every detail. Even the place cards featured gilded lettering. Locating mine was simple enough. Austin Mitchell, groom's father. However, someone had inscribed additional text below in flowing handwriting using what appeared to be a golden pen. Uneducated pretend dad. My blood froze. This had to be an error. Then I detected the mocking laughter from the opposite side. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, the bride's father and prominent heart surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, was grinning behind his cocktail. His spouse Victoria pressed her polished fingers against her mouth, attempting to suppress her amusement. Their son Bradford whispered to his relative, causing both to erupt in giggles while staring at me. "What did you anticipate?" Dr. Hawthorne remarked to his wife. "This individual constructs buildings for work. Likely quit school early for some teen pregnancy situation." My hands trembled as I discreetly turned the nameplate over and attempted to sit, but the harm was complete. The mockery spread rapidly through their section. 22 years of dedication, 2 decades of serving as both parents to Trevor, diminished to entertainment for their amusement. I rose, preparing to exit with whatever self-respect remained. But as I headed toward the door, a strong grip caught mine. "Dad." Trevor's tone was calm, yet determined. His gaze met mine, revealing something fierce burning within, something unseen since age 12 when he confronted playground bullies at Jefferson Elementary. "Let's go home," Trevor stated. "This is your celebration." "Let's go home," he repeated more loudly. The musicians ceased mid-performance. Discussions halted. 300 attendees turned as my son faced the Hawthorne table directly and announced clearly, "You've all committed the greatest error of your existence." He didn't shout or justify anything, simply departed that ballroom with me, leaving his bride and her family speechless behind us. The following day transformed everything completely. The journey to my modest Rogers Park apartment was completely quiet, save for Trevor's Tesla humming, a vehicle that still made me uneasy whenever I saw it. He'd purchased it the previous year with his technology earnings, though he'd remained vague about specifics. My son focused on Lakeshore Drive, jaw tight as Lake Michigan extended dark and infinite alongside us. Not one word until we arrived at my building, the same 3-floor walk-up where I'd raised him, where the heater still rattled in winter and Mrs. Rodriguez above still played her soap operas excessively loud. As I searched for my keys, Trevor finally spoke. "You know, Dad, I witnessed it, the nameplate. I saw it before you did. I observed from the side when Bradford's cousin wrote it. I waited to see a reaction." My heart dropped. "Then why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you speak up earlier?" Trevor regarded me with an expression I hadn't witnessed since his mother departed, raw anguish mixed with something harder, more distant. Because I needed to confirm they'd actually do it, if they'd truly humiliate the man who raised me on life's most significant day. His voice wavered slightly. "And they did." He retrieved his iPhone, displaying a video, security footage somehow obtained. Dr. Hawthorne chuckling as he passed the golden pen to Bradford's cousin. Victoria joking about trailer trash, mingling with respectable people. And most devastating, Trevor's bride Stephanie herself, nodding and stating, "My real father is the man I'm marrying for financial security. That construction worker is merely a technicality." I felt gut-punched, but Trevor remained ice-cold composed. "Dad, there's something I never mentioned. I refused to sign their prenuptial agreement." I blinked. "You didn't." They pleaded with me. Dr. Hawthorne even offered to invest in my small computer venture if I'd sign it. Trevor's smile was razor-sharp. But by then, I'd already created something quietly with my college roommate Jake, a cybersecurity firm called Fortress Digital. My mind spun. "Trevor, what are you saying?" "Last year, Microsoft purchased us. Complete cash transaction. He stared directly at me. I earned $47 million, Dad. Enough to purchase and dominate the entire Hawthorne family business, if desired. I collapsed onto my old sofa, the same one where I'd assisted him with assignments for 12 years. Trevor opened his laptop. They assumed they were acquiring a trophy spouse, some innocent kid they could shape and manipulate. What they failed to realize is I'd been playing chess while they played checkers. His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. And tomorrow morning, they'll discover who they actually attempted to humiliate. I awakened at 5 a.m. to fresh coffee aroma. Real coffee, not my usual instant variety. Trevor was already dressed in a navy suit, probably costing more than my vehicle, standing at my kitchen counter with a manila folder thick as a telephone directory. Today's the day, Dad. Today they learn who you truly are to me. Not some pretend dad, but the man who made me everything I've become. He handed me the folder. Inside were financial statements, ownership papers, and business filings. The Hawthorne Family Enterprise, Hawthorne Hospitality Group, a luxury hotel and restaurant chain throughout the Midwest, was quietly hemorrhaging money, and Trevor had been acquiring their silent partner stakes for months through shell corporations named Fortress Holdings and Mitchell Investment Trust. You already control part of their business? I whispered. Trevor's expression was predatory. Try 48%. And as of 9 a.m. today, when Henderson Pension Fund transfers their 12% share, I'll control the majority. 9:15 a.m., Hawthorne Hospitality Headquarters downtown. Trevor entered that glass tower like its owner, which I was beginning to understand he essentially was. Receptionists halted mid-conversation, jaws dropping as they recognized the construction worker's son from the wedding catastrophe already circulating as premium gossip. The boardroom was packed. Dr. Hawthorne occupied the head of that polished mahogany table, still radiating yesterday's smugness like expensive aftershave. "What's this about?" he demanded as Trevor calmly sat and placed that thick folder on the table. Trevor's voice was steady as stone. "Effective now, I control 51% of Hawthorne Hospitality Group. Here's the proof. Feel free to have your attorneys confirm." The silence was absolute. Then came whispers, frantic calls, paper rustling as Dr. Hawthorne's hands shook reading documentation of his empire's new ownership. "You little parasite," Dr. Hawthorne stammered, neck veins bulging. Trevor remained unmoved. "No, Richard. I'm the result of the man you ridiculed. The construction worker who built this city's skyline while you played golf at exclusive clubs. The pretend dad who worked 16-hour shifts so I could attend Northwestern, the same university where you lecture medical students about ethics." The boardroom was dead quiet. "Let me be absolutely clear," Trevor continued, addressing other board members. "I won't dissolve the company today, but immediately, Dr. Hawthorne, his wife, his daughter, and every family member are terminated from all positions. Security will escort you out. Your severance packages will be delivered." Dr. Hawthorne lunged forward. "You cannot do this. This is my company, my father's company." Trevor's voice remained controlled. "It was your company. Now it belongs to the man you called a pretend dad through me." With that, we departed, leaving the Hawthorne legacy in ruins. The weeks following what the Chicago Tribune dubbed the wedding revenge acquisition were chaotic. Trevor's story spread rapidly through social media and business networks. Headlines ranged from groom shocks elite in-laws to from hard hat to hostile takeover. My son, once dismissed as a construction worker's child, was now invited to speak at Harvard Business School and featured on Entrepreneur magazine's cover. As for Stephanie Hawthorne, she vanished from Instagram quicker than ice in summer heat. Her carefully crafted life of yacht parties and designer brunches went dark immediately. Chicago rumors suggested she and her parents now faced federal investigations for embezzlement and backdoor dealings Trevor's forensic accountants discovered during acquisition. But Trevor continued working, continued building. He relocated his company headquarters to a gleaming River North office, yet still visited my apartment every Sunday for pot roast and Cubs games, just like at age 10. Then came that rainy Thursday evening in October when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Stephanie Hawthorne standing in my hallway, drenched from the storm, her designer makeup streaming down her cheeks like watercolors. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, voice barely audible. "I need to speak with Trevor." I called him over. He appeared in the doorway, looked at her once, and his expression remained unchanged. "Trevor, I made a horrible mistake." The words poured out. "I was under tremendous pressure from my parents, from everyone. They constantly made me feel like you weren't sufficient, like your father was inferior to us. But I understand now." Trevor raised his hand, halting her mid-sentence. "You understand now that the man you insulted owns the building you're standing before." Her eyes widened. She looked past him to me sitting on my old couch. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm deeply sorry. I was young and foolish." "Stop." My voice was quiet but firm. "You're not sorry for your actions, sweetheart. You're sorry for the consequences. She froze like a startled deer. Trevor pulled an envelope from his jacket. Your parents signed this when desperate to liquidate remaining assets. It's a non-compete clause preventing any family member from working in or holding shares in any hospitality business in Illinois for 20 years. He handed it to her. That includes you. Tears flowed down her face. Trevor, please. Can't we discuss this? Work something out. He looked at her one final time, and I saw in his eyes the same quiet strength I'd tried to teach him throughout the years. You had your opportunity to talk, Stephanie. You chose mockery over respect. You chose public humiliation over love. Now I choose my father's dignity over your regret. He closed the door gently, but definitively. 6 months later, I sat in the Chicago Hilton's Grand Ballroom front row, not as a wedding guest this time, but as the honored guest. Trevor stood at the podium in a navy suit, addressing Chicago's business elite, city officials, and scholarship recipients. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to announce the Austin Mitchell Foundation for Working Families Education launch. The applause was thunderous. Mayor Johnson stepped forward to shake Trevor's hand. What inspired you to start this scholarship program? She asked into the microphone. Trevor's eyes found mine in the crowd. That man right there, Austin Mitchell. The one who was mocked for building the city with his hands. The one who worked 2 jobs so I could have one. The man who taught me that true worth isn't measured in bank accounts or degrees. It's measured in integrity, sacrifice, and love. I felt tears sting my eyes as 300 people rose in applause. For the first time ever, I felt like the wealthiest man in the room. After the ceremony, Trevor and I walked along the Chicago Riverwalk, city lights dancing on the water like scattered diamonds. You didn't need to name it after me, I said quietly. He stopped walking and faced me. Dad, everything I am, everything I've built exists because you believed in me when nobody else would. When Mom left, when school kids mocked my secondhand clothes, when guidance counselors suggested I should consider realistic career options, you never stopped believing. I thought about that frightened single father I'd been 22 years ago, wondering how I'd ever raise a boy alone. Looking at Trevor now, successful, principled, strong, I realized I hadn't just raised a son. I'd raised a man who knew the difference between being wealthy and having worth. Besides, Trevor grinned, I figure it's time the Hawthorne family learned what a real legacy looks like. The foundation would eventually provide full scholarships to over 500 children from working-class families. But that night, walking along the river with my son, I knew I'd already received the greatest return on investment a father could ask for. 2 years passed, and life settled into a rhythm I'd never dared imagine. Trevor's company continued expanding with offices in New York and San Francisco. The foundation was flourishing, sending kids from backgrounds like ours to colleges nationwide. And me? I still lived in my little Rogers Park apartment, still drove my old Ford F-150, still watched Cubs games with Mrs. Rodriguez upstairs. But I wasn't the same man who'd entered that wedding reception with his poorly fitting suit and wounded pride. I carried myself differently now, not because of money, but because I'd learned that a man's worth isn't determined by others' opinions. It's determined by what he builds, what he gives, and whom he raises. Then came the phone call that would test everything. Dad, you need to see something. Trevor's voice was tense when he called that September morning. Turn on Channel 7 News. I grabbed my remote with trembling hands. There on screen was a familiar face, Dr. Richard Hawthorne standing outside the federal building in downtown Chicago, flanked by lawyers and cameras. Charges of insurance fraud and tax evasion spanning 5 years, the reporter was saying. The Hawthorne family faces potential prison time and millions in penalties. This comes just 2 years after their hospitality empire was acquired in a hostile takeover by cybersecurity mogul Trevor Mitchell. I muted the TV and called Trevor back. How are you handling this? There was a long pause. Honestly, Dad, I feel empty. I thought I'd feel vindicated, you know? But watching them fall apart like this, seeing Stephanie's children affected by their parents' choices, it just makes me sad. That's when I knew I'd raised him right. Revenge might have been sweet momentarily, but real strength, real character meant knowing when to stop fighting and start healing. Son, I said quietly, maybe it's time to consider what comes next. What do you want to build instead of what you want to tear down? 5 years after that disastrous wedding, I found myself in another elegant ballroom. But this time, everything was different. The Austin Mitchell Foundation's annual gala was being held at the Palmer House with over 800 guests celebrating our scholarship recipients. As I looked around the room, I saw faces that told a story I was proud to be part of. Maria Santos, whose mother cleaned office buildings, was now a resident at Johns Hopkins. David Kim, whose father drove taxi, was finishing his MBA at Wharton. Sarah Williams, whose grandfather had worked construction alongside me, was starting her own tech company. Trevor took the stage to thunderous applause. At 30, He'd grown into the kind of man I'd always hoped he'd become. Successful, yes, but more importantly, generous and grounded. 5 years ago, he began, my father and I walked out of a wedding where people laughed at us for who we were. Tonight we celebrate not what divides us, but what unites us. The belief that every child deserves a chance to dream big, regardless of where they come from. He paused, scanning the crowd. And I have an announcement. The foundation is expanding. We're not just funding college educations anymore. We're creating apprenticeship programs, trade school scholarships, and small business loans for working families. Because success isn't just about getting a degree, it's about building a life of purpose and dignity. The applause was deafening, but what moved me most was what I saw in the back corner. Stephanie Hawthorne, now Stephanie Walsh, remarried to a high school teacher, was quietly applauding. Her children, a boy and girl around 8 and 10, sat beside her. She caught my eye and nodded, not in defeat, but in what looked like respect. After the ceremony, she approached me cautiously. Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you. I raised an eyebrow. Thank me? The foundation gave my daughter a scholarship to music camp last summer. She doesn't know it came from you, but I do. Her voice cracked slightly. After everything I did, everything my family did, you still helped my child. I looked at this woman who had once laughed at my son's wedding, who had called me a fake father, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Compassion. Stephanie, I said gently, children aren't responsible for their parents' mistakes. Your daughter deserves every opportunity to shine regardless of our history. She wiped tears from her eyes. I'm trying to teach them differently. Teach them to judge people by their character, not their bank accounts or their jobs. That's all any of us can do, I replied. Try to be better than we were yesterday. As the evening wound down, Trevor and I stood on the hotel balcony, looking out over the Chicago skyline, a skyline I'd helped build with my own hands all those decades ago. Dad, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed at that wedding? I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, son, I think everything happened exactly as it needed to. That humiliation taught us both something important, that our worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. It's determined by how we treat others, how we face adversity, and what we choose to build with our lives. Trevor smiled. You know what the best part is? The Hawthorne name is remembered for scandal and fraud, but the Mitchell name is going to be remembered for giving kids a chance. As we watched the city lights twinkle below us, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating your enemies. They're about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need enemies at all. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and lifting others up along the way. The scared single father who walked into that ballroom 5 years ago with his ill-fitting suit and wounded pride was gone. In his place stood a man who knew his worth, not because his son was successful, but because he'd raised a son who used his success to make the world a little bit better. And that, I thought, was a legacy worth building. What would you have done in Austin's situation? Share your thoughts and don't forget to follow for more stories of resilience, family, and unexpected triumph. Because sometimes the greatest victories come not from getting even, but from rising above.